to FRE Lunch, the official podcast of the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. I'm Elena Poulin, the Marketing and Communications Specialist for the department.
And I'm Caleb Stair, Assistant Instructional Professor of Food and Resource Economics and the Coordinator for Undergraduate Research in the department, meaning I get to interact regularly with the members of our UF community and see all the cool and interesting topics being explored.
That's why we made this podcast, to showcase the many ways students and faculty are using research to understand and address the complex issues facing agricultural and natural resource industries.
In 2025, there's lots of interesting issues that economics can be applied to, but that's only one faucet of the whole solution.
To get the complete picture on one of these issues, we're teaming up with the UF Water Institute and new co-host Sarah Mark for a deep dive into the fathoms of Florida's fresh water.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mark, the Communications and Events Specialist for the Water Institute. Essentially, we serve as a connector between collaborators across the university and beyond.
From wells to wellness. That's right. Today's episode is all about drinking water. Wait, that can't be right.
What do you mean?
It's 2025. Who on earth drinks just water?
Caleb, we're all really worried about you.
Apparently, drinking water is essential for human life.
With a world population over 8 billion and counting, there are lots of ways that we access our water.
Some places have easier access to water than others.
Some places have easier access to water than others. In the Sunshine State of Florida, water is never far from your front door or under your feet.
But just because you have easy access to water doesn't mean that it's always the safest to drink.
And that is kind of a big deal if we're talking about drinking water.
Today, we are joined by three different guests to discuss this complex topic. First is Dr. Weizhe Weng.
So my name is Weizhe Weng. I'm the assistant professor and the extension specialist at FRE. So my specialty is water policy.
Before coming to our department, Weizhe got her PhD in economics from Virginia Tech. While there, she had opportunities to work on large interdisciplinary projects on water pollution issues.
I actually had a lot of opportunities to interact with waters, especially the Great Lakes like Lake Ontario. And then my personal experiences and also my academic training really draws me into study water issues, because I think water is a subject that actually is very interdisciplinary. You need to learn water law. You need to know the economic tools and the principles to study this. And more importantly, I think it's a real world implication.
We are also joined today by Dr. Andrea Albertin.
My name is Andrea Albertin, and I'm the Regional Water Resources Extension Agent in the Northwest Extension District. We have 5 extension districts in Florida. I'm in the Northwest, which basically covers the Florida Panhandle.
She has an eclectic background with degrees in biology, botany, and agroforestry. But after working with stakeholders over time and being repeatedly asked questions related to water, her work has shifted to that.
And so then I got a PhD here in Florida, aquatic biogeochemistry. And so when I first started out, I'm just really interested in that sort of the whole looking at systems as a whole. It was initially plants, soil, water, and how that all connected itself. And as I have progressed in my career, impacts to our natural systems, human pressures is what I'm really focusing on now. So my primary focus as an extension agent is really working with communities here in Florida, working with different stakeholder groups to reduce pressures on our natural systems, and now largely focused on water.
Last but not least, we're joined today by Dr. Yilin Zhuang.
Just after hearing Andrea's and Weizhe's, my path seem to be a little bit linear. So, hey, everyone. My name is Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent with UF IFAS Extension for Central District. So, in other words, I'm Andrea's counterpart in Central and North Central Florida. Just like I mentioned at the beginning, my whole background, career path seem very linear because all my degrees from my bachelor to my PhD, it's all civil and environmental engineering. It just each stage, it's a little bit different focus. So what really got me into water, it was more like my bachelor degree.
Yilin got her bachelor's degree in China, where she did environmental science and engineering and had to learn about water, air quality, and solid waste.
And of course, I did all three, and I interned at all three different sites. And the funny thing, it's not that funny. It's across our campus, there was one stinky river. So from my all 4 years there, that river was always stinky and always muddy. So with my background there, it was like, okay, since I'm environmental engineering, what can I do just to get that water clean? That's sort of just pave my way into water, especially in like drinking water and the wastewater treatment.
Actually reminded me about something. My hometown was called the water capital of China, and I was living along the largest freshwater lake in China. And when I was growing up, I do see the degradation of water quality in my hometown. But also I'm thinking about the economic development issue because we are a less developed province in China, and how to balance the environmental protection and economic development is what I'm interested in. And I think the water issues actually help me to think about the trade-offs.
Although they are spread across the state, these three researchers are frequent collaborators, combining their unique skill sets to tackle water-related challenges.
I think the three of us actually makes the perfect team to study the drinking water issues because we have different discipline and knowledge. But also, more importantly, the three of us all recognize it's important to get connected with our stakeholders, learn from each other, learn from stakeholders, and then tackling the water issues together.
So it just really, to me, it's a really run team, people with different specialty, people with different focus, and they also have different established network can really help us to get all the information to the community. And meanwhile, I also want to shout out to our wonderful student interns and also student volunteers that help us through the Florida Well Owner Network, because I know Sarah was one of our wonderful volunteers, really took the first step of the Florida Well Owner Network website. So I just see it it's really bring interdisciplinary team, bring different collaborator to this team. It's only making the impact go broader and go stronger.
Now, when we were originally discussing doing this season, and it was an entire season based off of water, the first thing I thought of, which I probably don't do enough of, is drinking water. Now, the Earth is a little bit more than 70% water, but obviously we're not drinking all of that. So where does our drinking water actually come from?
I think it depends on where you are, do you live. So I'll take myself as an example. I live in Gainesville. So my drinking water comes from the public water system, the Gainesville Regional Utility, GRU. And the GRU takes their drinking water, or their water sources from Floridian aquifer. And because we live in different places, it will be good to see where Andrea and Yilin got their drinking water.
Caleb, when you ask your original question, where does our water come from? As we just said, we each live in different places, but I first wanted to just talk about sources of drinking water in Florida in general, and then I can go in. So in Florida, the majority of us get our drinking water from the Floridan aquifer system. About half of Floridians get it from the deep Floridan aquifer system, which underlies all of Florida. But there are many regions where the Floridan aquifer system is too deep to access. And also in those deep areas, the water tends to be brackish, so it has a lot of minerals in it. So people living in areas where it's hard to access the Floridan receive much of their water from aquifer systems that lie on top of the Floridan system. So for example, in the Western Panhandle, there's an aquifer called the Sand and Gravel Aquifer. In South Florida, the Biscayne Aquifer. Southwest Florida, there's an intermediate aquifer. Some people get it from a surficial aquifer system. It's closer to the surface, sort of on the Atlantic side, North Atlantic. So it really does depend where you are. There are also people in Florida that get their water from surface water sources. So in Central Florida, multiple rivers. Yilin can talk about those, but the Peace River, Ocklawaha, with Withlacoochee. In Panama City area where I live in, there's a reservoir, Deer Point Reservoir, that gets its water from creeks. So it really does depend on where you are.
Just like Andrea mentioned, it really depends on where you are. That's where your water coming from. And to be more specific, it's like where your drinking water come from. So I think it's about over 90% of Floridians get their drinking water from groundwater. So, but that's more like in general. Then just like Weizhe mentioned, so if we drill a little bit deeper, then okay, after groundwater, what happened after that is like if you're a utility user or is a private well user. So if you're a utility user, then your water, of course, are from the public utilities, then it's treated and monitored by the public utilities. So if you're a private well users, then you're responsible for monitor your drinking water and also for treating your drinking water if it has any contaminants. And also it's different systems than where in groundwater or in aquifer you get water. It's different. Typically, it's like if you're a private well users, then your water, like it's the aquifer, it's a little bit shallow than your public utilities because they can drill well. It's not they typically drill well. It's a much, much deeper than private wells.
And how do you go about regulating these systems?
So for public water systems, in the US, we have the Safe Drinking Water Act that basically is help to protect health by limiting the drinking water contaminations.
Basically, the Safe Drinking Water Act allows us to identify polluted water, try to prevent that pollution from happening, and if it does happen, fund cleaning it up.
The fun fact is Safe Drinking Water Act might be older than all of us, and because it has passed their 50th anniversary, and I would say the Safe Drinking Water Act is a success process in which they are keep updating the rules by thinking about the emerging science knowledges and also by thinking about the community impacts. So as an economist, we care about the benefits and the costs of different regulations.
When it comes to the Safe Drinking Water Act, one of the biggest benefits is avoiding negative health outcomes.
So health benefit is definitely one biggest benefits from the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the economist has a way to evaluate the health benefits, which comes from health consequences.
Costs like getting treated for a waterborne illness, or more societal costs like lower birth rates.
On the flip side, economists also measure the total cost of keeping these regulations effective.
It comes from the treatment cost. And also for the enforcement phase, regulators will go through the sampling process, actually differs by different pollutants. So there is the sampling cost and other related regulatory costs.
A recent economic study, linked in the description below, actually looked at U.S. water pollution regulations over the last 50 years. And found that the Safe Drinking Water Act was 4 times more beneficial than costly.
But that's all for public systems. When it comes to private wells, it's a different story.
For private wells, because it's not under Safe Drinking Water Act, it's mainly on private well owners' own responsibilities. So that's why I think Yilin and Andrea's work about this private well network is so crucial. And I will turn to them to explain how to ask for help and what to do if you serve as a private well owner and do find some problems.
According to Yilin and Andrea, the first thing that private well owners should do is know what they should be testing for and when.
All right. So for private well users, we recommend them to test bacteria, nitrate, lead, and pH every year, and also test their local contaminants of concern. And to find out what's your local contaminant of concern, so we recommend them to contact their local health department to find out. For example, for some regions, they may have some historical arsenic in their groundwater.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Yilin just said is that we always say that it's up to the well user, private well users, that they to make sure that their drinking water is safe. But we do want to say, and we let our people that come to our classes know, that Florida does have something called the Well Surveillance Program or Well Surveillance Network, and it's led by DEP, and it was with FDOH, the Department of Health as well, where they do provide resources for people on private well systems that might be near a known contaminant area, an area of known contaminants. So they call these areas delineated areas. So it could be an area where there's historical pesticide use, as Yilin mentioned, or areas around, say, abandoned gas stations, just areas where you know that there might be some contaminant level leakage. So if you're in one of those areas or near one of those areas, the Department of Health can let you know. And if you're close enough or you might have potential contaminants, then the state does provide testing for that and then ways to remediate that.
So that's what Florida well owners should be doing. And if that sounds a bit complicated, not to worry, there is help. in the form of the Florida Well Owners Network.
And so as a regional agent, that was something that it was suggested, it was recommended that we really look at it, and looking at how many Floridians rely on private well water for drinking water. There's more than 2 million Floridians that do it, just especially in rural areas, just seemed like something very important for me to focus on. And I realized that I couldn't do it by myself at all. And so that's where the relationship with Yilin really came into play. And together we've been working on this program. And it was so phenomenal to collaborate then with Weizhe, because looking at just larger, broader economic impacts, how poor drinking water quality can affect populations, why it's important to ensure that Floridians and others have safe drinking water.
The Florida Well Owner Network is now available year-round, but originally it was created to deal with shocks to the system after Hurricane Irma.
Back in 2017, after Hurricane Irma, Andrea led an effort in partnership with Virginia Tech to test private wells across Florida. We find about 38% of wells had bacteria after flooding. That provided us with very preliminary baseline to understand private well water quality.
Since then, they have continued doing more outreach and routine water testing, finding that even without storms or flooding events, about 18% of Florida wells are still showing some form of bacteria.
This just shows how important regular water testing is, and that's also one goal of the Florida Well Owner Network.
And so initially, the Florida Well Owner Network was a response to hurricanes and then people having their drinking water affected, especially those that were on private wells is what we focused on. But because we were brought together as a team, we now develop resources not only for private well users, but also for people on public supply systems that, say, during a storm or afterwards are also effective, also have boil water notices. So what we've realized is one example of coming together and a really strong team has been as a response to these natural disasters, to these storms, where really everyone is affected, no matter where you get your water from. And so a lot of the resources that we've been building have been in response to that as well. So that's another really good case of interdisciplinary work that goes well beyond the team of us three.
So is there anything you would like our listeners to keep in mind when considering the importance of protecting and managing our drinking water?
Raised awareness is always the key for us to thinking about improvement. And especially in Florida, because groundwater are connected, and in economic terms, we usually call it, this is a common pool source problem, which means your action will affect the groundwater quality that will affect others. So I will say the best way to protect and manage drinking water resources is like we need to raise our awareness. We need to know our actions will have impact on others.
I think it would be good to let people know that if they have any questions about the drinking water, especially if they're on a public supply, that they can always reach out to their water utility. And those people are very helpful, and they can look at their things. And then if you're on a private well system, then as Yilin had already mentioned, there's your local county health department is a great first step. Water management districts, depending on where you are, might regulate the permits for your private well. That's the case where I am, where Water Management District is the permitting agency for private well systems. And then, of course, there's extension. You can always call your local county extension agent and they can reach out to us or reach out to us specifically. So there's multiple levels of help that private well users can access.
So I think I will just do one more specific call to action. 100% agree with what Weizhe and Andrea said, but my special call to action is really to private well users. Private wells are not regulated. So for private well users, the only way to know if the water you're drinking is safe or not is to test your water. So you cannot tell if the water is safe or not just by looking at that, by smelling at that, or even just feel at that. The only way to know that is to have your water tested.
So, to wrap up, there are 3 main types of drinking water systems in Florida: public utility, private wells, and community wells.
Each of these systems is subject to different regulations.
And understanding those regulations and why they are in place better allows us to protect this precious resource.
This isn't just about us being able to drink the water. The ecosystem, the animals, and everything else around us is relying on this fresh drinking water as well.
We hope that this episode has given you a better sense of where your water comes from and why it's not as simple as turning on the tap.
And maybe think about that the next time you are taking a sip of this cool, refreshing liquid.
If you're interested in learning more or have questions about any of the resources we've mentioned today, we will link to them in the episode description below.
If you've made it this far, you've finished the entire episode, and we thank you for that. Tune in next time for more food for thought. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of FRE Lunch. We hope you'll come back again for seconds.